From here in Britain, the American education system makes as much sense as a crossword puzzle that you fill out with emojis. You have one national curriculum, a tidy list of what kids are supposed to learn and at what age. America has 50 different ones, then you get it broken down by districts, and whatever the school board president felt like he wanted to add the night before school started. As someone who survived this system without becoming a conspiracy theorist or a motivational speaker, I'm going to do my best to guide you through it all. Why British kids from Carlisle to Cornwall learn the exact same thing at the exact same rate, while in America they can't decide on what age a kid should be before they teach long division, and if dinosaurs and humans walked the earth at the same time. Spoiler, they didn't, unless you count the Flintstones, which in some states is basically a documentary.
Good morning, Mr. Vice President.
Britain has a single curriculum for education. It means that, barring a few rogue academies, that every student learns the exact same thing at the exact same time. Same years, same assessments. It's consistent. It's predictable. America's approach? 50 different countries in a trench coat. It's like every little state is its own sovereign kingdom. Then each state said, great, let's do that, and let's divide that again. So in America, instead of having one national curriculum, you have 50 different states, 13,000 different districts, 100,000 schools, and millions of very strong opinions. This produces classrooms where one district will teach climate science, and another teaches that gas stoves are part of God's law, and a third spends half the year preparing for active shooter drills, because kids learn ballistics before they learn biology in America. This is freedom. In the early 2000s, the U.S. tried to fix the education system with something called No Child Left Behind. The name sounds lovely, like giving kittens little mittens.
Kitten mittens!
Schools became required to hit certain milestones or lose funding completely, meaning schools became a factory for test taking, not education. No learning, no thinking, no understanding. And these tests weren't tied to students passing class or anything. They were just standardized fill-in-the-bubble tests to grade the school on how they think they've been teaching the children and if it's been successful. If a student couldn't read, rather than addressing this issue, they would often be just pushed ahead to the next grade so not to lose funding for the school. I quite literally graduated with a kid who could not read, but was never held back in class to have anyone spend the time with him, because failing students actually did affect what kind of funding the school would get as well. We'll go in a little deeper how you can not read and not know the answers, yet still pass your class. Little trick, you just had to show up. So in my high school, we had classes in 3 different categories. You had general, which is just entry-level knowledge, honors classes, which was you wanted to try a little harder, and AP courses, which were called advanced placement, and then you could use those classes to take another test to try to get credit for college classes later. Yet, even if you took these AP courses, you did not by default get college credit for them. You had to pay to take an additional test, which sometimes cost $90 to $150 to even get those credits. In general education classes, because of No Child Left Behind, teachers were forced to mark answers correct as long as they put an answer. Yes, you heard that correctly. As long as you put an answer, you had to mark it correct. I was a teacher's aide my senior year of high school, which was the last year of high school, and I was a teacher's aide for a World War II history class. It was a general education level, which meant any answer these kids put had to be marked correct because it showed they tried. Now, one girl in the class found out about this loophole, and when posed with the essay question of what caused World War II to start, she wrote a full essay on because the house fell on the Wicked Witch of the West. Now, the teacher that I was being a teacher's aide for ended up getting in a huge fight with the principal because he hated marking this correct because it was fundamentally untrue. But at the end of the day, he was forced to mark this correct and give her credit for this. That's No Child Left Behind, baby. Now, fortunately, No Child Left Behind was repealed in 2015. As I mentioned earlier, each state and each district can pick what they want to teach as their school's curriculum. And as you can imagine, a lot of history gets changed, particularly in the Deep South. Go figure. And it probably comes to a shock to nobody that the topic that gets adjusted the most is the Civil War. Now, there are cases of the Deep South calling it the War of Northern Aggression. Or my favorite you'll always hear is it wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights. But the states' right to have slaves was the right that they were fighting about. Some states have even gone as far, and recently this has been a really big issue, as banning textbooks that mention the word slavery at all. Earlier this year, in the state of Oklahoma, which, let me mention, tests 50 out of 50 in education in America, meaning it is literally the worst testing state. People have the worst grades and the worst comprehension skills out of any state. They introduced a textbook to be taught, and it got adopted, that teaches the 2020 election was stolen. This is also the same state that the superintendent of the state, which is basically saying the boss of all of education in Oklahoma, wanted to introduce having the 10 Commandments in every classroom, as well as a Bible. Ironically, are the ones you most expect, he recently resigned due to being found watching a lady in an adult situation on the TV in his office. Go figure. You know it's bad when the birthplace of colonialism looks at your country and goes, "You guys all right?" Then there's religion in public schools, where it's not supposed to be, because public schools in America are the free schools open to every student, paid for by tax dollars. And despite the Constitution very clearly saying the separation of church and state, schools for decades have been really pushing the boundaries on this. I'll give you a personal example for myself. In my middle school, when I was 14 in 1998, back in old Henderson, Kentucky, they had an event called Heritage Day, which meant they just made all of us sit in the gym like a really lame pep rally and had the whole school bow their heads and pray. Now, I refused to put my head down and pray, and the principal came over and tapped me on the shoulder and scolded me for not putting my head down. And me being the little nerd I've always been, I immediately told him how this was illegal to make me do in a public school, and the moment I mentioned illegal, he walked away. But everyone else in the school put their head down, and most 14-year-olds don't know their rights.
And soon you may ban books and newspapers. When bigots burn the man who dared bring enlightenment and intelligence to the human mind.
In Britain, you have the GCSEs, a national requirement for school. Standardized, recognized. In the US, the requirements vary so widely that most schools do not have anything even comparable to that test. There is no final test to be able to pass school. Most times, you just simply have to make sure you showed up for class, as I mentioned earlier. Whether you learned anything or not, that's a separate, optional adventure. This is how someone can graduate school without learning how to read or write and not really understand why the Wicked Witch of the West World War II theory is not widely accepted in academia. Now, something related to my personal high school, we had a daycare. Yes, it was for the students. It has been there since the 1970s. And while it is sad that this has to be there, it also is really helpful to keep kids from having to drop out after they have children while they're children. But this goes into a deeper issue, the lack of sexual education in America. So a lot of these kids literally did not know how babies were really made until they made one. In most states, parents have to sign a permission slip to allow their children to be able to go to sex education classes, which usually happens around 14. The main focus for most of these sexual education classes is teaching abstinence. Nothing of real value, nothing about protection, and nothing about relationships. Just simply, hey, don't do that thing. Meanwhile, in Britain, teaching children biology with actual diagrams is why that is not such a big issue here. But even science isn't immune to this. In some districts, you're allowed to teach evolution, but in some districts, you're required to teach evolution next to what is called intelligent design, going back to the people writing dinosaurs thing. It's like teaching astronomy, but there's a second unit to the class called maybe the sky is just a snow globe and it's been painted and we're all living in it. In Kentucky, I was taught both, because nothing says world-renowned education system like seeing a photo of Jesus riding a pterodactyl in your textbook. Kentucky is also the home of the Creation Museum, which was funded by tax dollars, and there are actual pictures and diagrams and models of people riding dinosaurs. I know I keep referencing this often, it's because it's a real thing that exists in America. Now say you survived all of that and could read well enough to send an application off to university or college. Well, the American bachelor degree takes, on average, 4 years, where on average the one in the UK takes 3. And let me explain why. Basically, your first year in college will be an educational rehabilitation system. And because everyone is taught something different based on where they came from their high school, they have to make sure everyone understands the most common basic knowledge before you even get to dig in your major, which won't happen until your second year. So your first year of university or college is spent learning English, basic maths, and maybe a foreign language that you're just starting at 18, which is incredibly difficult to do. Once they've made sure you're all caught up, your second year you can actually begin studying what you came there to study, which is also ironic because of the cost of university in America. They just get to milk one more year out of you for student loans. Now let's talk about something else that's very different in the States, and that will be homeschooling. And if you thought public education was incredibly unregulated, wait till you learn about homeschooling. In Britain, homeschooling is monitored, measured. There's requirements that you have to do. It is still school. In the States, while there are regulations that people are supposed to come check on you and make sure you are doing your homework, that often doesn't happen or happens only in the form of a phone call asking, hey, did they do their work? And because each district and each state gets to pick their own education, you get to pick whatever your curriculum is for your homeschooling. So often these begin being very religious based. There are actually workbooks for students on homeschooling that teach girls specifically how to measure in bushels, not numbers, because you're not going to need those pesky numbers when you're a housewife. I personally had a friend I grew up with that went on homeschool when we were 14, and no one ever checked in on her. Nobody made sure she was doing her work. And guess what? At 14, she wasn't. So she ended up essentially dropping out of school at 14. Now, she did go on later to get her GED, which is called a general education degree, because as she got into adulthood, she realized it was very difficult to find work without even just a basic high school diploma. Now, homeschool can be well done. There are plenty of families that are brilliant, but I would say that is a very small percentage of the people who end up on homeschool in America. It is disproportionately used by families who would not have signed that sex education permission slip. Britain's system may be stricter, but it ensures 2 things. Children are safe and children are educated. The US system of homeschooling basically guarantees neither. Is the British system perfect? Of course not. No system is perfect. But compared to America, it's basically a Swiss watch. American students' education depends mostly on where they're at, what state they're in, what district they're in, what the politics of that local school board are, and how religious that community is. Now, America has produced brilliant minds, but that is not because of the system, it is in spite of the system. The British system is like having an adult in the room, while the American is like a kid with a bucket on their head. And that's the American education system from someone who survived it, mostly. Were you shocked to learn that America doesn't have a standardized curriculum for the whole country and that people can be taught whatever is on the mind of that district? Let me know in the comments below. Have you ever watched a movie about American high schools and thought, wow, that looks so fun? Not realizing if it was factual, some of those kids couldn't read in that movie. Please like and subscribe, hit that little button, leave those hype points if it's up, and I'll see you in the next one.